Hi folks, I'm Mike Sherwood, also known as 3Dtest, and I'm a professional 3D artist and consultant with a focus on realistic character modeling and animation. Over the years, I've been involved in software development as well as content production using motion capture, human scan pipelines, as well as photo modeling applications. And recently I've been doing a lot of work with Reallusion's new headshot plugin for Character Creator. The following video is not a tutorial, it's a start-to-finish recording of the work I did to produce the model you see here. The animations were made using mocap in iClone 7. The model was made using Headshot and Character Creator, with additional texture work in Photoshop. The total time to get the model to this standard was about 3 hours, but to make this more watchable, I've speeded up the footage so it'll take around 10 minutes here. And whilst it's not a tutorial, I'll try to pick out salient points in my workflow, which I hope will be of interest to other 3D artists. I start off here in Photoshop preparing the single front face image I'll be using in Headshot. You can see that I correct the head tilt and perform a little de-lighting to improve the image first. Next, I generate the headshot model from the photo, and because I prefer smooth mesh, I subdivide and also apply some more appropriate procedural textures for this particular subject. And now in Headshot's photo alignment mode, with the original image overlaid for reference, I'm using the morph sliders to more closely match the model to the photo. And Headshot's automatic results do vary depending on the quality of the original image. But even with a challenging photo like this, if you're prepared to put in the work, you can get a close match using the morphs alone. Now, reprojection is fundamental to correcting the texture when morphs have been applied, and when I'm working on headshot models, I reproject a lot as the model progresses to ensure that the relationship between the mesh and the texture is going in the right direction. So my initial workflow is to focus on photo alignment like this, performing multiple morph passes and reprojects, and essentially working into the model. It's very much like playing a game of Spot the Difference, where you're looking for mismatches between the photo and the shape, and using the morphs to fine-tune the match between them. And as I proceed with these iterations of morphing and reprojection, you'll notice that the changes I'm making are getting smaller and smaller as I go into further detail. I'm trying to get the match as close as I can before moving on to further steps. Now, just how much work is required at this stage is very much dependent on the original photo and how well Headshot has analyzed and automatically matched the model. But even where models appear to be well aligned, if you want to produce the best results, it's important to be critical and to try to resolve as many issues as you can with the morphs before moving on. Obviously, photo alignment is only addressing the match to the front image, and once I'm reasonably happy with this, I start to think about depth. Now, future versions of Headshot will combine depth alignment and projection in the same way as the front. And meanwhile, you can use side reference for alignment using image planes. But here, since I don't have a side reference image to work from, I simply use the morphs freehand to produce more appropriate feature depth. So at this stage, I'm alternating between side and frontal alignment, effectively starting to round out the model. And whilst I'm doing this, I'm continuing to look for areas of geometry which can be improved further, and to continue working on areas which still have noticeable problems. Now, Headshot currently offers two morphing approaches, via sculpt morphs, which allow you to select and drag the features on the model itself, as well as the morph sliders, which I'm using here. Sculpt morphing is great for faster and more general work, but it uses a reduced morph set. So for more detailed work, I'd very much recommend that artists become familiar with the slider approach. I've progressed about as far as I can at this stage using morphs, and I also check the wireframe to confirm that I can't go any further at the ears. So before combining vertex editing with morphing, my next step is to start looking at the textures. And first, I make a quick adjustment to skin color to make a better match. And next, I customize the mask a little in Photoshop to include a little more of the original photo mapping. I'm also checking for remaining shadow artifacts from the original photo, and before moving on to edit the final baked texture, I make some further modifications to the photo diffuse map to improve the look of the current texture blend. And being able to edit the photo diffuse as well as the mask at this stage means that I can do a lot of fine-tuning whilst still controlling the blend as well as the procedural elements I'm using. But the next step, once I'm reasonably happy with the blended textures, is to work on the final baked diffuse map via the Character's Modify Material panel. So here I'm working on the final diffuse map in Photoshop, and I'm improving the blend around the face boundary by cloning elements of the facial skin into the surrounding areas. And since this subject has old skin with many liver spots, I also use spatter brushes to extend this effect across the face more generally, as well as using further cloning to improve the texture at the blend areas, here around the nostrils and lips. And you'll notice that I'm leaving quite a large blend area here between the lips. This is because I want to ensure that the texture remains as seamless as possible from the outer lips through to the inner mouth. Now, I'll be doing some further fine-tuning on the diffuse later, but now, since Headshot does not yet produce unique normals based on the original photo, I'm addressing the model's normals here by making two normal maps from the diffuse and using these to pick out the subject's eyebrows, as well as to blend the face normals with the original procedural normal beneath. And since I don't have any side face imagery of the subject to use for compositing, I'm also using the subject's nostril normals to start to contour the model's earlobes more appropriately. And now moving on to a more detailed polishing stage, here I start to use Character Creator's mesh editing tools to work on the mesh at vertex level. I can still use the morphs if needed, but where the features are particularly unusual or extreme, such as this subject's earlobes and nostrils, it's important to be able to go beyond the morphs to fine-tune the mesh itself if you're aiming for the best results. Now, you can of course use the Go Z function to send headshot models to ZBrush for additional sculpting, but if you're confident with morphing and mesh editing, you can do all that you need directly within Character Creator itself. Moving on to further issues now, I'm starting to think about animation, so I check the model's eye blink extent and fix this here using the correct eye blink function, along with some eyelash morph adjustment. I also adjust the light to check that the model is looking better in the round, and next I'm adding some stock hair which I edit, both the textures and the geometry, to produce something which looks more like the original subject's hair. Of course, you can also bring in hair models from external applications, but if there's an existing hair model which can be easily adapted to fit, this can be a faster way to go. And by simply changing the material settings as well as transforming vertex soft selections and element selections where needed, it's surprising how much you can customize the existing stock models. Next, I'm adjusting the teeth, and whilst you can spend hours customizing the individual teeth using the morphs, here, my focus is simply to ensure that the teeth are well aligned and well proportioned for animation. At this stage, it may seem that the model is almost complete, but I can still see many areas which can still be improved. So I perform further passes of image and vertex editing as well as morphing to correct the remaining problems. And for experienced artists, this really is a unique feature of Headshot and Character Creator workflow. When you're at the polishing stage, after the final reprojection and once you're happy with the procedural texturing, you can work in a completely non-linear fashion on the fully rigged model. So you can continue refining the mesh and final textures, as well as checking the photo alignment and testing the model to see how it will animate in any order you wish. As you can see here, I'm adding some further variation to the ears on the diffuse head texture using the same spatter brush approach which I used on the face earlier. And throughout this polishing process, I keep checking the model to ensure that the changes I'm making are having the effects I want. And even at this stage, I can still return to photo alignment and use the morphs to make further shape adjustments, as well as use vertex editing to improve the model further. So here, I'm making some final mesh adjustments to the nostrils, and this is not only to polish the shape, but also to improve the mesh interpolation and reduce irregularities, which is important for best results from animation. You can see that because of the subject's highly flared nostrils, the mesh has become bunched as the nostril transitions into the upper lip. So here, I'm editing the vertices to reduce this bunching and improve the overall mesh balance. Now, apart from matching the skin tone, Headshot's procedural head texturing doesn't yet include the neck, and on an older subject like this, it's noticeable that the model's neck appears too smooth compared to the face. So, to improve this, I edit the model's body diffuse texture in Photoshop by quickly painting in wrinkles as well as indicating a few more neck sinews. And just as with the face and ears, I use spatter painting to add some more appropriate variation. Then, after checking that the diffuse is looking better, I use the diffuse in the same way as I worked on the head, to produce a normal which I blend into the base body normal map. So now I'm in the last stages and making a final check of the head itself, and I can see that there are still some mesh issues underneath the model's ears, so I perform a little more vertex editing to improve the mesh in these areas. Now I'm generally happy with the model as it is, and of course I can always return to do some further polishing, but before I produce a final animation, I'm dressing the model. I'm using stock clothing here and making texture as well as mesh adjustments where I think they're needed. But of course, just like the stock hair, you can produce your own custom clothing as well as accessories in external 3D applications and use them here in Character Creator. And doing a last check of the model now, I can still see a problem at the outer corner of the right eye, which I want to improve, since the eyelid wrinkle doesn't seem to sit naturally over the eye. Now, at this level, I could also edit the head diffuse to improve the issue, but here I'm doing some final mesh editing to adjust the eyelid and eye corner. So I'm now at the end of 3 hours of speeded up modeling and editing, and I could spend more time improving the model further. But I'll finish off by testing the model's animation, and to do that, I've sent it over to iClone. And once in iClone, I can use all of its built-in animation tools as well as motion capture plugins, and I can also send the model back to Character Creator and Headshot at any time for further modification. So this model has taken about 3 hours to produce from a single photo, and it's ready to be animated. I'll finish off with a verse from one of my favourite old Irish songs. Thanks for watching.
Oh, Peggy Garden, you are my darling. Come sit you down upon my knee, and tell to me the very reason why I am slighted so by thee.